In a land where dust often buries dreams, something unthinkable is unfolding. 1,000 kilometers of road, built without a single loan from Paris, Washington, or Beijing. No billion-dollar bonds, no foreign firms, just sacks of dirt, calloused hands, and an unwavering will. This is not a myth. It is the heartbeat of Burkina Faso, where Captain Ibrahim Traoré dared to do what many said was impossible. To connect a nation, not with cement and debt, but with unity and resolve. In a world where 1 mile of road can cost up to 1.5 million US dollars, Traoré's people found a way to build the same for under $15,000. And they did it with soil. This is not just a story about roads. It's a question of dignity, a rejection of the lie that Africa must always borrow to build. This is more than just dirt and gravel, it's about dignity. Stay with us, and if this story stirs something in your chest, subscribe. Our elders dreamed of this moment. Let's not look away now, because the world may not be watching. But this is what a real revolution looks like. The story begins not with a government announcement or foreign investors in dark suits. It begins with dusty villages and determined hearts. In the wake of decades of foreign dependency and debt-ridden development, Captain Ibrahim Traoré looked out at the cracked roads of Burkina Faso and saw not failure, but a starting line. Over 60% of the population lived in rural areas, many of them disconnected from hospitals, markets, and schools, not by politics, but by sheer inaccessibility. Roads were not a luxury. They were a lifeline denied. Enter the Dunu method, a technique so rudimentary it was dismissed by contractors and consultants alike. No cement, no bulldozers, just soil, sacks, and sweat. But it was this very simplicity that birthed a revolution. Step 1 was choosing the right soil, often laterite, found in abundance across the Sahel. Villagers filled standard-sized sacks, each compressed exactly 20 times to ensure strength and consistency. These were then laid tightly, row upon row, compacted again, and finally sealed with gravel or topsoil. Where international firms required million-dollar contracts and heavy machinery, Dunu demanded only what people already had: their labor, their land, and their unity. But what made it revolutionary was not just the cost, it was the mindset. For decades, the prevailing model of development said African countries must outsource progress. Highways meant debt. Airports meant foreign approval. Even clinics and classrooms were rarely built without a logo from overseas. Dunu ripped that notion from its roots. With a cost of under $15,000 per mile, it shattered the illusion that infrastructure had to be expensive, imported, or indebted. A road that once meant a decade of interest payments now required only a few months of community effort. In the regions surrounding Wahiguya, Kaya, and Fata Ngurma, villagers worked side by side, elders guiding youth, women carrying sacks, children helping water the compacted earth. It was not just construction. It was resurrection. State engineers provided basic training, soil selection, moisture control, compaction strategy. Where needed, low-cost mechanization was used. Small graders, hand rollers, tools made locally or donated from regional schools. In return, the state supplied villages with essential materials: sacks, shovels, small grants of $2,000 to $3,000 per site. Just enough to spark ownership, not to replace it. By mid-year, 1,000 kilometers of road had already been built or was under construction. Routes that once took ambulances 6 hours could now be crossed in less than 3. Trucks once abandoned in the mud now moved freely. Trade revived, attendance at schools soared, and most of all, pride returned. For every kilometer laid, villagers not only earned a wage, $5 to $10 a day, but also a sense of ownership. These weren't roads built for them. These were roads built by them, and that distinction changed everything. And let us be clear, this is not about rejecting modernity. Traoré made no war on asphalt. His goal was not to deny technological progress, but to bridge the gap. To make sure that while Burkina Faso worked toward long-term prosperity, its people were not left stranded today. Critics called it temporary. He called it strategic. Let the people reach their hospitals now, he said. Let the children reach their schools today. And let us walk the road to sovereignty on our own feet. One official noted, when we spent $1 million per mile, we got contracts, photos, and ceremonies. When we spend $15,000, we get roads, That is the quiet rebellion of Dunu. No press releases, no Parisian architects. Just kilometer after kilometer of hope laid down by those who had waited long enough. The project also redefined the very idea of Burkina Faso roads. No longer just a physical structure, they became metaphors. Paths carved through doubt, through imposed narratives, through the centuries-old myth that Africa must always ask before it acts. Each bag, compacted 20 times, was also a statement repeated 20 times. We do not need to borrow to build. And that was what made the world nervous. Because if Burkina Faso could build without begging, what would stop the rest of Africa from doing the same? But if bare hands can lay 1,000 kilometers of road, what more can they build without permission? Some revolutions unfold in grand halls. Others rise quietly from the ground, where dust and sweat mix to forge something unbreakable. In Burkina Faso, this revolution reached its emotional peak not when the first road was completed, but when the first ambulance arrived on time. For years, a mother with a sick child faced an impossible choice: walk miles on foot or wait for a vehicle that could not pass. In the rainy season, the road became a grave. But after the Dono method laid its foundation in the northern village of Yalgo, that mother watched her child survive because help arrived in minutes, not hours. That is when people began to believe, not just in a road, but in themselves. In the markets of Dori, farmers once lost half their millet harvest because it spoiled before reaching town. Now carts and trucks glided over compacted soil where once there was only mud. A man named Alassane, 53 years old, shared that for the first time in 3 decades, his crop reached the capital intact. His income doubled. He sent 2 of his children back to school. In Bobo Dioulasso, a young girl named Aminata used to walk 2 hours to school, often through flooded terrain. One day she slipped and broke her ankle. It was a turning point. Her village joined the Dunu initiative and laid road to the nearest secondary school. Months later, Aminata was back in class, this time in clean shoes, on dry ground, arriving in 30 minutes instead of 2 hours. These are not anecdotes. They are testimonies, etched into every meter of earth, every stitched road. And the ripple effects spread fast. By the 3rd quarter of the project, more than 10,000 villagers had participated directly. Unemployed youth, once lured by migration or criminal networks, now earned steady wages building roads their families would walk on. Some formed cooperatives. Others started local maintenance brigades. It was the birth of a people's economy rooted in sweat equity. The impact drew attention from across the continent. Delegates from Niger, Mali, and Chad visited the construction zones. Some were skeptical, others left inspired. A Tanzanian engineer reportedly said, "You have turned poverty into productivity." That is the rarest kind of genius. But while praise trickled in from neighbors, Western media remained largely silent. There were no glowing profiles on CNN, no deep dives in the Financial Times. When mentioned, it was with a hint of dismissal. Low-cost rural road experiment or Burkina Bay improvisation. They missed the point entirely. This wasn't improvisation. It was resistance. A rebellion against the narrative that African infrastructure revolution must wear a foreign logo, carry a foreign debt, and serve foreign interests. Meanwhile, inside Burkina Faso, something deeper stirred. A pride not seen in generations returned. People began referring to the roads not by their official names, but as our hands roads. When rain threatened to wash out a section, locals didn't wait for contractors. They gathered, repaired, reinforced. A cracked road was not a complaint to file, it was a call to act. That kind of ownership, born from participation, is what foreign-funded projects almost never deliver. A road built by machines is easily abandoned. A road built by hands is defended. But it wasn't just emotion. It was political. Mayors and regional councils began pushing back against centralized contracts. They asked, why pay millions to firms from abroad when our people can do the work for a fraction and keep the income local? Traoré encouraged this shift. He didn't hoard the idea in government vaults. He let it spread like fire across dry grass. Dunu was never meant to be a secret. It was a spark. And that spark lit up even the most unlikely places. In the town of Pama, a region once strangled by banditry, villagers completed 18 kilometers of road in less than 8 weeks. It connected their isolated markets with the provincial capital. Bandits fled. Trade returned. Confidence soared. Each of these stories forms a tapestry of defiance. One sack, 1 kilometer, one transformation at a time. This is the revolution nobody predicted. No coups, no declarations. Just ordinary people rewriting their fate with soil and resolve. If roads can save lives and feed families, what else have we been told we cannot do on our own? In the quiet corners of Burkina Faso, where the state once seemed a distant rumor, the arrival of a dirt-packed road changed more than just the terrain. It redefined citizenship. When Traoré launched the Dunu initiative, he didn't simply ask villages to build roads, he invited them to participate in nation-building. And with every stretch laid, the effects rippled far beyond transport. Economically, the impact was immediate. Farmers, previously trapped in cycles of loss, now reached urban markets before their produce spoiled. Crops like millet and cassava, once fetching $200 per season, now earned $400 or more, simply because of timely access. One farmer near Tenkodogo said, "For the first time, I can feed my family without begging the season for mercy." The roads did more than move goods. They moved lives. Children, long relegated to homes during floods or dry season isolation, returned to classrooms. Attendance surged. School principals across rural provinces reported the same trend, a rise in girl-child attendance, particularly in regions where unsafe footpaths once deterred families from letting daughters travel alone. In the health sector, the shift was no less profound. Clinics that once sat empty now welcomed patients daily. In the village of Kudugu, a midwife named Mariam spoke with tears in her eyes. "We no longer lose babies in the rain. The roads brought the mothers back to us." And behind these practical wins lay something even more powerful, a political awakening. For decades, infrastructure was a top-down affair. Projects were announced in capital cities, delivered by outsiders, and celebrated in photo ops. But Dunu flipped the model. Instead of centralized control, local councils received micro-grants, often no more than $3,000, to spark mobilization. With that modest support, they hired their own youth, coordinated their own labor, and built their own future. Suddenly, villagers weren't just recipients of aid, they were stakeholders in sovereignty. This shift sent tremors through the political fabric. Mayors who once had no budget for roads now petitioned for expanded authority. Civil society groups, youth cooperatives, and women's associations began lobbying for decentralization laws that would enshrine their right to build. A proposal was even drafted suggesting that 2% of the national budget be allocated annually to community-driven infrastructure, bypassing bloated ministries and foreign middlemen. The implications were radical. In a country long told it needed permission to grow, people now asked, why should we wait if we can do it ourselves? And yet with empowerment came resistance. Contractors who profited from inflated road budgets saw their grip slipping. Some lobbied for regulations that would ensure standards. Others whispered that Dunu roads were unsafe, hoping to seed doubt and reclaim control. But the numbers refused to lie. While traditional roads demanded $20,000 to $50,000 per mile in annual maintenance, Dunu roads needed only a few $100s, and that cost was spread across local labor, not swallowed by foreign firms. In essence, the roads were not just cheaper, they were democratized. Communities became custodians. When a crack appeared, they repaired it. When a section eroded, they reinforced it. No calls to a distant office. No delays. Just action. And in doing so, they redefined what it means to be part of a nation. This wasn't charity. It was redistributive justice in physical form. One elder in the Sahel said it plainly. "We have always been told that development trickles down. But this rises from the ground." And this ground-level resurgence challenged even the most entrenched ideas about progress. Do roads need to last 30 years if they can be repaired by hand? Do they need to carry 18-wheelers if they carry the hopes of a village? Should governments pay millions to be seen or thousands to be felt? It is these questions, not the roads themselves, that are reshaping political discourse across Burkina Faso. And they are being echoed far beyond its borders. Because if one country can prove that dignity doesn't require debt, what excuse remains for others still waiting on donors? If you believe this is the model Africa was waiting for, type "Rise Up" in the comments below. But if a $15,000 road can change an entire village's future, why do we still accept million-dollar excuses? To those watching from afar, the roads of Burkina Faso may seem like a local project, a modest attempt at connectivity. But for governments, financial institutions, and geopolitical strategists, the Dunu movement signaled something far more dangerous: a shift in narrative power. For decades, infrastructure in Africa was synonymous with dependency. Mega highways from China, railways sponsored by France, energy grids backed by the World Bank. Every road came with a flag. Every bridge carried a logo. And beneath each slab of concrete lay the weight of conditionality, of contracts inked in foreign capitals. So when Captain Ibrahim Traoré announced that Burkina Faso would construct 1,000 kilometers of road without IMF loans, EU consultants, or Chinese machinery, it wasn't merely a technical decision. It was an act of geopolitical defiance. The silence from Western capitals was telling. In Washington, little public comment was made. Behind closed doors, however, analysts raised eyebrows. One internal memo leaked from a European embassy referred to the Dunu initiative as a destabilizing populist model, citing concerns that if it spread, it could erode confidence in conventional aid frameworks. The United States, while outwardly neutral, continued funding traditional development channels, but notably withheld public endorsement of Burkina Faso's self-built effort. Think tanks questioned the long-term viability of dirt roads, as if longevity were the only measure of worth. But Russia, sensing opportunity, responded differently. Through regional diplomatic channels, Moscow praised the model, framing it as a sovereign alternative to neo-colonial development. This was less about ideology than influence. In a region where Russia competes with France and the U.S. for foothold, supporting self-reliance earned them soft power without spending billions. The African Union and ECOWAS remained ambivalent. Internally fractured and often dependent on donor funding themselves, they hesitated to endorse a model that implicitly criticized their own bureaucratic delays and foreign partnerships. Still, mid-level officials from Mali, Guinea, and Chad began asking for technical briefings, indicating a quiet interest behind closed doors. The European Union, traditionally a key funder of West African infrastructure, issued vague statements on the importance of standards and partnerships, carefully avoiding mention of Dunu altogether. For them, the project was an inconvenient truth, a demonstration that high-impact development could occur without European oversight. More than the roads themselves, it was the message that rattled global corridors of power. Africa can build without asking. And if Burkina Faso's experiment proved that connectivity, dignity, and empowerment could be achieved for 1% the cost of traditional models, then what happened to all the billions spent before? That question remains unanswered. Because answering it would unravel the myth that underpins African infrastructure revolution as it's long been sold, that Africans must purchase progress, not produce it. If foreign contractors profit from our dependency, who truly fears our independence? In every chapter of Africa's history, there comes a moment when the people must choose. Follow the familiar road paved with outside promises, or carve a new path with their own hands. The Dunu method, for all its modesty, has sparked this very crossroads. Across the continent, eyes are turning toward Burkina Faso, not because of the smoothness of its roads, but because of the boldness of its will. Governments in Ghana, Ethiopia, Mozambique, and beyond are quietly studying the model. Engineers and community organizers are sharing soil tests, sack patterns, moisture ratios. The movement is no longer local. It is continental. But the road ahead is not without potholes. The first challenge is legal protection. Without a framework that decentralizes infrastructure funding and empowers local actors, Dunu risks becoming a passing wave, admired but unsustained. Policies must evolve, allowing direct grants to communities, bypassing ministries that often suffocate initiative with red tape and delay. The second is resistance from entrenched interests. Contractors, consultants, and middlemen, those who have profited for decades from inflated deals, will not surrender their grip easily. They will argue about international standards, about efficiency, about safety, not because they care for the people, but because they fear losing the monopoly on development. Third is mental colonization, the belief, deeply internalized, that only outsiders can deliver modernity. Undoing that mindset requires more than roads. It requires education, narrative, and leadership, exactly what Traoré has begun to cultivate. But with these challenges come immense opportunities. If just 500 villages across West Africa were each given $20,000, a sum less than the cost of a single foreign consultant's report, they could collectively build over 600 kilometers of road. That would connect markets, clinics, schools, and security posts faster and cheaper than any imported program. It would create jobs, spark local economies, and reweave the fabric of citizenship. And it would do so without a single drop of debt. The lesson is simple but seismic. Africa's future does not require permission. For elders who once walked barefoot to school, for youth raised under the shadow of aid dependency, for mothers who buried children because help came too late. This is no longer theory. It is a call to build. Because when we build together, we defend together. And when we own the ground beneath our feet, no empire can dictate our direction. If roads can become weapons of sovereignty, linking security to self-reliance, then what excuse remains for African nations still outsourcing their defense to those who benefit from their vulnerability? Some revolutions are televised. Others are buried beneath headlines that never came. But in Burkina Faso, every sack of earth compacted 20 times is a broadcast of defiance. A declaration not just of infrastructure, but of intent. This was never just about roads. It was about rewriting the story we've been told, that Africa must wait, borrow, or beg to rise. That dignity is a foreign product. That development must wear imported suits and carry foreign flags. But the villagers, students, and soldiers of Burkina Faso answered with their hands. They said no. And in that no, they built something permanent. Because Burkina Faso roads are more than pathways. They are the fingerprints of self-determination. They lead not just to schools, clinics, and markets, but to a mindset that refuses to be colonized again, not by guns, but by debt. To the elders who've seen promises come and go. To the youth still told their future depends on aid. To the nations watching in silence or doubt. This is your proof. 1,000 kilometers of proof that you do not need permission to move forward. That an African infrastructure revolution can begin not in bank vaults, but in villages. Not with concrete plans from abroad, but with courage, coordination, and clay beneath your fingernails. So let the world ask, is it sustainable? We ask, is dependency sustainable? Let them say, it's not perfect. We answer, but it's ours. Burkina Faso roads may not be paved in gold, but they are paved in purpose. And if this story moved something in your chest, do not scroll in silence. Like, share, and subscribe because our history has been muted long enough. It's time to say our future out loud. What do you see in this movement? A solution? A blueprint? A revolution in disguise? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Say, Africa, rise if you believe in a future built from the ground up.